Welcome back to our channel. I'm Colleen and this is Our Blessed Life. Today we are going to talk about adoption, specifically the 5 things that I wish I knew before we adopted Sophie from China. This video is in collaboration with Crystal at Knotted Oak Farm. Crystal is a mom of 4. Their 3rd child came home from China in 2015 as well. Her channel is about homemaking and simple living, and they also homeschool. I'll put a link to Crystal's YouTube channel in the description box below. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the harder truths about adoption and some of the things that our family went through as far as our adoption from China. So I'm going to give you a brief kind of background on that, just so that we can kind of all be on the same page before I give you the 5 things. But I'm also going to link a video up top that tells our adoption story. Okay, so we adopted Sophie when she was 3.5 years old from China. My husband and Katie and I all traveled to China for the adoption. Her special need that we had been told about was developmental delay, and when she was placed with us, it was clear that she had severe and global developmental delays. The first thing that I wish I knew about adopting from China is that the grieving would be fierce. Now, I think everyone understands that adoption is born from loss. You know, the birth mother, there's a loss there. You know, there's loss on the side of the child. In the situation regarding international adoption, they're losing, you know, potentially their heritage, their birth family, any other relatives that they may have known or whatever. And the truth is that most of these children never knew that. They never remembered that. They were in an orphanage or they were in foster care, but there's still loss associated even with that, because they do have relationships with caregivers. So adoption is born from loss. And we knew that. We knew that going in. We had a lot of training, hours and hours and hours and hours of training was required for our adoption for myself and for my husband. However, what I think that we didn't quite understand is the extent of the grieving that would happen, because Sophie had a very difficult time adjusting. So like I said, she was not an infant. She was 3.5 years old. She was nonverbal. She couldn't really explain what her needs were or what she was going through. And it was a very, very difficult time. And I would say it lasted for at least a year. And I'm talking about really, really severe. Sophie would sit and cry for hours and hours and hours and hours on some days. It wasn't just crying, it was like kicking, screaming. You're afraid she's gonna hurt something, you're afraid she's gonna hurt somebody, or you're afraid she's gonna hurt herself. And there was nothing that we could do to get through to her. Like I said, the communication wasn't really there. She wouldn't let us hold her. And she wasn't like this 100% of the time, but she was like this a lot. You know, we had some amount of grieving pretty much every day. For the most part, when she was grieving, she really didn't want to have anything to do with us. So I do think that bonding was a little harder than we anticipated because of the level of grieving that she experienced. And bonding with me was particularly difficult. I think it was probably about a year before Sophie really wanted to have much to do with me at all. I think the only thing that she liked about me for the first year was that I was the person that usually gave her food. And Sophie likes to eat. So that was, as you can imagine, for me as the mom, that was very difficult. It was very difficult on Sophie. She really, at that time, even though she was 3.5 years old, you know, between that and that year, she went from 3.5 years old to 4.5 years old. But socially speaking, emotionally speaking, she was really more like an infant. She was probably, I would say around probably more like an 18-month-old baby. And so it was a very, very difficult year. Also, there's grieving on the side of the adoptive family, because as you can imagine, you know, your life is kind of going on normal. You're bringing this child into your family. You understand that there's going to be trauma. You understand there's going to be grieving. You do not understand that it's going to last a year and it's going to be so extremely severe. And honestly, there was no one that could help us. You know, we talked to doctors. We talked to the International Adoption Clinic. We talked to our adoption agency. There was really no one that could help us. The things that they told us to do, not one thing worked. The only thing that worked was prayer and time and love. You know, that's really all that worked. But a lot of the things that they suggested to do, like bottle feeding and just kind of going back to treating her like a baby, wrapping her up, Sophie didn't want anything to do with that. She did let me rock her, and that did help a little bit, but the bottle feeding and all of that kind of stuff was just not helpful. So anyway, so there's grieving on both sides. As you can imagine, Katie's life was turned completely upside down, because the life that she had before this was, you know, pretty much carefree. But now there's a new child in the family, which she was extremely supportive of. And, you know, when Sophie arrived, you know, she loved her dearly, but there was just constant trauma with the crying every single day. And just, you know, it was difficult to go anywhere. It was difficult to do anything. The first year was an extremely difficult year. Now, not everybody deals with that. And Sophie did not have RAD, any of those types of severe things, but she did have a very difficult first year. And I really don't think that we understood that it could be that bad without having a condition like reactive attachment disorder, which Sophie does not and did not have. So I don't think that we understood that without something like that, that you could still have such a severe problem, you know, for the first year. The second thing that I wish I knew before we adopted from China is that there was such a black hole with regard to any information about Sophie at all, whether it be medical, family, anything like that. So like I said, in China, if a parent abandons a child, it is, you know, a criminal offense. And so, you know, they have to do so in a way where they're not caught, and you know, there's no like legal way, or at least at the time, there was no legal way for that to happen. And so it becomes very difficult to get information, because they're abandoned at some point after birth. Their birth dates are estimated. The file that we had very limited information. So we don't know who the biological family is. We don't know any of their medical information. We don't know if there are biological siblings that Sophie has in China. We don't know any of that. We don't even know her birthday. That was estimated. And in the files that we do have, there are actually 2 birth dates listed. So we're actually not even sure of her true estimated birthday. We were lucky in that an advocacy group that was working with Sophie's foster family called Grace and Hope for Children, they were making home visits, and we do have some pictures from her early years. Now, when I say early years, we really don't have any pictures before about 18 months old. So we do have some pictures from roughly 18 months old to about 3.5 years old, but we don't even know where she was before that. We don't know what her like home situation was. We don't know if she was going back and forth between the orphanage and the foster family. We just have no idea of what was going on in her life. You know, obviously as her mother, I wish I knew more of that information, but where that information becomes difficult is when Sophie is now starting to ask me, you know, where did I live? You know, what was I doing in China? You know, she hasn't asked some of the harder questions yet, but she is asking some like basic questions. And unfortunately, most of the answers that I have to give her are, I don't know. I just don't know. We don't know the answer to that. I think that before we went into this adoption process, that I thought that we would know a little bit more than what we really do know. The third thing that I wish that I knew before we adopted from China, it kind of goes hand in hand with the second one, and that's lack of information medically. So when you adopt a child from China, you are given a file, and the file on that child does have their special need. Now in China, all adoptions are considered special needs adoptions, meaning some sort of medical special need. Now I will say that generally in the adoption world, most adoptions are considered special needs because the adoption in and of itself really creates special needs situations. You know, there are things that are caused by adoption, you know, trauma, you know, if the child was in an institution like an orphanage, there are certain orphanage behaviors that children develop just to be able to survive where they are, to be able to get their needs met. They have certain things that they will develop, certain orphanage type behaviors is what they're called. And so really most adoptions are considered special needs. Even babies that are adopted like right after birth, they still experience trauma. Studies have shown that there is an effect on their brain because I guess intuitively they know that they have been separated from their biological mother. Again, just going back to that whole idea that adoption is born from loss. There is a loss there, and the loss is significant. And so in this third point that I'm making, we really don't know much about Sophie's medical history, and we did not know much about Sophie's special need. We were told that Sophie had a developmental delay, so that was the special need that was, you know, mentioned in her file. Well, she was also on what they call the special focus list, so we knew that that must be a pretty significant developmental delay. But developmental delays we had dealt with before because Katie was born premature, and we had walked down the path of delays and therapies and all the things, pretty much every area. So that was something that we felt like was in our wheelhouse. We had walked that road before. But when a lot of times when children have developmental delays, it can be for another reason. So in Sophie's case, it was a rare genetic syndrome. Now, many adoptive parents don't put out information publicly about their children's special needs, and you may be wondering why we have done that, because a lot of people consider that like private information or information for, you know, the child's story or whatever. In this case, we feel like because SETD5 is a rare genetic condition, very few people in the world have it. I don't know that there are more than 200 people. There's certainly not more than 300 people diagnosed in the entire world at this point. We want to be able to provide some hope and some information for other parents, whether they're adoptive parents or not, that are walking this road with their SETD5 kids. I would love to have videos of a child with SETD5 that I could see, of a child that's a little bit older than Sophie. You know, how does she read at age 10? How does that child, you know, run and walk and play? How is her speaking? You know, I don't have any of that because the reality is that Sophie is one of the older SETD5 kids. Now, there are people older with Sophie that are diagnosed with SETD5, but very few in the whole world. So we actually have a SETD5 Facebook group for parents and even for a few adults that have been diagnosed with SETD5. And most of the kids in that group, most of the parents have children that they're usually getting diagnosed around age 2 to 3 years old. They're missing milestones and what is going on, what's wrong, that kind of thing. And in some cases, siblings have been diagnosed because they already had a known, like parent or other sibling that had SETD5. So anyway, with Sophie, we did not know any of the medical information other than developmental delay, and obviously it ended up being much more extensive than what we knew. So that's kind of our situation with Sophie's case. But for many people that do adopt from China, the medical files are very not specific. Like the special needs that the adoptive parents will be told about will be more like a symptom than the actual special need. So in Sophie's case, the symptom was developmental delays. The diagnosis was SETD5. So we didn't know that until much later. until much more testing was done. But again, some people do keep that stuff very private, and I definitely understand that, but we feel like that we are led to share Sophie's story, and the reason why is because we feel like other parents with SETD5 children need to hear that there is hope, and that, you know, that their children can thrive with this genetic syndrome. And I will put a video up top that talks more about SETD5. Like most genetic syndromes, it is a spectrum, so there are children that are more severe and children that are less severe. Okay, the fourth thing that I wish I knew before I adopted from China really surprised me. This is probably the thing that has surprised me the most. And that is that Sophie really, right now, doesn't want anything to do with her Chinese heritage. So, you know, again, we had all the training and all the things, and we were, you know, learned about how important her heritage is and how to incorporate like Chinese New Year and all the things. And we want to do that for her. We want her to know her heritage. We want her to have relationships with adults who are Chinese, that we want her not to be disconnected from her heritage, you know, especially if that's what Sophie wants. But right now she wants nothing to do with it, and honestly it's really confusing to us. I don't know if it's the type of thing that children kind of go through and then ultimately they want to know more. Right now we're trying to respect her wishes, so if she asks us questions, we answer them. If she wants to see pictures, we show them. Otherwise we just don't, because we don't want to upset her right now. One of the things that also surprises me, in addition to the fact that she's not really interested in her Chinese heritage right now, she almost has a bitterness or a little bit of, I don't know if anger is the right word, but maybe regret is a better word. And it's about us not being there with her in China. Like, why did we wait to come get her? She doesn't understand, why did we have to wait to come get her? She gets upset about things like, why weren't we in China with her? Why was Sophie not born from mommy like Katie was in the hospital here? And those things really, really bother her. When she'll tell me things about how she was in the orphanage and she was alone. You know, and when she says alone, she doesn't mean that like she was completely alone. She means that Daddy and Mommy and Katie weren't there. And it's very upsetting to her. She's obviously going through something and processing things now, but that was not something that I expected, you know, her to go through. We thought it would be the reverse, that it would be, you know, because when you listen to older adoptees, a lot of times they regret losing their heritage and things like that. That's kind of the road that I thought we were going to go down, and try to do what we could to help her with that. But it's kind of the opposite right now, and we really weren't prepared for that. And the last thing that I wish I knew before I adopted from China was that some people will just never get it. If you are expanding your family, you know, in the traditional way, and you let people know that you're pregnant, there's a lot of congratulations and excitement and things like that. But sometimes when you say you're adopting, you're met with, instead of excitement and congratulations, a lot of times you're met with confusion, like why? So some people are just not gonna get it, and that's okay. It is a different mentality, you know, we're thinking differently than other people, because yes, we're adopting. Our daughter's 10 years old, and yes, we're adopting. Yes, we're adopting, and we're not adopting an infant, we're adopting a 3.5-year-old. Yes, we're adopting a 3.5-year-old who has special needs that are likely severe. And yes, we're adopting a 3.5-year-old who has likely severe special needs and lives in a foreign country. So those things really don't make sense to everybody. And so we kind of get that now, but I think at first it was a little bit of a shock to us. Like, we didn't really understand why we were getting some of the questions, and why maybe some people that we thought would be like super supportive were really more like, are you sure this is the right thing? Are you know, And we did not go into this lightly. We were called to adopt. You know, we were obediently following that call from God. So, you know, this was not an easy path. This continues not to be an easy path, but it's a path that has blessed us. I feel that it's blessed Sophie, it's blessed us, and yes, adoption is born from loss, but I do think that there can be a lot of blessing there as well. And I think it's okay if everybody doesn't understand it and everybody doesn't agree with it. You know, that's okay, because everyone's not called to do this. So these are the 5 things that we wish that we knew before we adopted from China. I will say that it's been one of the greatest blessings of our lives. If you have watched any of our videos that have Sophie in them, you know that she is just such a great joy. I mean, she is like joy defined. We're so grateful that we were able to adopt Sophie, and no matter how hard it has been or will continue to be, we're so grateful that Sophie joined our family in this way. And you know, we are very aware that we could have missed this blessing. We could so easily have missed this if we would have listened, you know, maybe to people saying, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Instead of just listening to the call from God and just being obedient to that call. So I hope that you will check out Crystal's video at Knotted Oak Farm. I'm going to link her channel in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.